How does a premature baby defy the odds to become a leading expert in neonatology and one of the few Black female neonatologists in America? Welcome to Doctors of the Baobab. On this podcast, we go beyond the white coat to get to know the doctors that we admire and respect. Join us as we explore the stories behind the stethoscopes, uncovering the humanity behind the medical expertise. Whether it's navigating the complexities of patient care, overcoming personal obstacles, or advocating for change in the healthcare system, each episode promises to inspire, to educate, and to uplift. And in today's episode, I'm honored to have Dr. Josel Doyle as my guest. Dr. Doyle is a board certified neonatologist and pediatrician with a rich background in healthcare. She has earned her medical degree from St. George's University in Grenada. Dr. Doyle is a prominent member of the American Academy of Pediatrics. A true embodiment of resilience, Dr. Doyle overcame numerous challenges, from being a premature infant herself to facing academic and professional hurdles to becoming one of the few Black female neonatologists. Her story is a testament to perseverance and the power of faith, driving her mission to ensure diversity and representation in medicine. In addition to her medical career, Dr. Doyle is also a physician transformation coach, helping women to overcome burnout and achieve personal growth through her Intentional Grace MD coaching program. Her entrepreneurial spirit extends to affiliate marketing, promoting holistic wellness and hydration. Dr. Doyle's journey from a failure to thrive infant to a thriving physician and coach is truly inspiring. Join me as I welcome Dr. Doyle as she shares her incredible journey. Dr. Josel Doyle, welcome to Doctors of the Baobab.
Thank you so much. Listen, I am hearing you read that and say that, and I'm like, who is she talking about? And honestly, it keeps me humbled because I'm reminded, obviously, why I fell in love with the profession, but it's also reminded me of where I've come from and why I stay so committed to this journey. And
Hmm.
being able to help other physicians like ourselves to be able to continue in this profession, but most of all, recognizing that our gifts extend beyond medicine. And for me, I think that's been my biggest wake up call for all of this.
And thank you for starting there, because traditionally on this podcast, we really start at the very beginning. And
Mm,
so when I did a little bit of research about you and I encountered that history, of course, this is a platform for doctors. So when I think about premature babies, it's not often in my mind that I would have envisaged that you would be a neonatologist. And I'm sure for your parents that wasn't the case. But I want to hear your story, starting from where you were born and how you became a neonatologist.
thank you. So I am originally from the beautiful island of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. It's one of the islands, obviously, in the Caribbean. And 40 years ago, matter of fact, almost 41 years ago, I came into this world clearly with a mission. I came in 2.5 months too early. When my mom went to the hospital, she kept telling everybody this baby is coming, and nobody listened to her because for them it was too early. And you obviously don't know what you're talking about. Mind you, I was her fifth child, so of course she knew what she was talking about. And all day they kept telling her it's fine. And by the night time, it was change the shift. And she's calling the nurse. She said, this baby is coming now. And the nurses shrugged her off because it was change the shift. They're ready to get off. And one of the oncoming nurses, my mom, called out and she said, this baby is coming. They
Mm.
ran. They got me out. And of course, when everybody saw me, they were like, oh, this baby is really small. So from then, everybody kept telling her, your baby's not going to survive. Back then, 40 years ago, in an underserved area, in a low restricted, still is to this day, I was not expected to survive. I was born 3 pounds, 2 ounces.
Mm,
And when I left the NICU, I was 1 pound, 2 ounces.
mm, mm,
Under no circumstances was any doctor sending a baby home. But
mm,
they couldn't get me to go. They couldn't get me to gain weight. And my mother saw that. She saw the struggle. And she made up her mind one day she was going to the pediatrician and she said, I want to take my baby home. She says, I understand you keep telling me my baby is not going to survive, but right now we can't get her to feed. And if it's God's will for me not to be here, it's okay. It's time for me to take her home. And of
mhm,
course, my pediatrician back then was like, no, she has to be a ward of the state. We can't send her home, blah, blah, blah. And there was another nurse that was on, and the nurse also advocated with my mother. My mom is a very stubborn woman, and I didn't recognize how stubborn she was until obviously the older I got. And I saw why she was able to convince my pediatrician, right? And my pediatrician said, okay, take her home. 2 weeks later, I went back to her. I was thriving. I was putting on weight. This little
mm,
rat started putting on weight and could actually fit into clothes and doing all this stuff. And
mm,
that's really where my story started from. And of course, whenever you have a
mm,
baby that's failed to thrive, you expect them not to be able to do well in school. And that
mhm,
really wasn't my case. I was a regular, I was an average student at the end of the day. I was never
mhm,
a top tier student or anything of the sort, but I knew what hard work was, right? And I learned
mhm,
that from both my parents. My dad was a police officer, and my mom was a retailer, right? And I remember at 5, my mom took me obviously for my pediatrician's appointment. And she's this short, beautiful Indian lady with the longest hair, the quietest personality. But you can tell that she's this tiny giant that I always remembered her as this phenomenal woman. And I looked at my mom and I said, I want to be just like her when I grow up.
mhm,
And I remember my mom telling me since back then, if that's what you want to do, then that's exactly who you're going to become. And
mm,
ever
mm,
since I have been gung ho. I wanted to be a neonatologist, not just a pediatrician. For me, I always knew I did not want to just be a pediatrician. So when the time came, obviously, I wanted to be pursue medicine at the time, and I didn't want to put my parents in the financial difficulties of it because we all know it becomes a commitment that you have to make to not only
mm,
start and in debt, but it's a lifetime commitment of many years of studies. And I didn't want to do it at the time because of the financial burden I know it was about to bring for my parents. And I never wanted to put them in that. And my mother said, if this is what you want to do, we're going to get started and God is going to make the way for the rest of it. And I had a mentor at the time that advised me also, if this is your dream, Josel, if it's one thing you have always proven to me is that once you've made up your mind you want to do something, you will put your mind towards getting it done. And I did.
mhm,
I ended up agreeing, went to St. George's, which was the best decision ever. First year,
mhm,
of course, I had to pay my way. And then I ended up getting a scholarship.
mm,
So I got the
mm,
rest of my medical school way paid, and obviously I had to take care of all my other bills and all of that stuff. But God provided a way. And for
mhm.
me, that was really where all of this journey started.
Mhm. That's an amazing story, and I'm going to come back to some of the elements that you've mentioned that I'd like to tease out a little bit more. Already from what you're saying, there's a strong theme around your faith and your spirituality. You've mentioned a few times role models, mentors. So I definitely would want to come back to that. But my question at the moment is looking back and the early experiences that you've had, and you might have touched on it a little bit as well. But looking back on your early experiences, how have they shaped your approach to life and also to medicine?
For me, it was recognizing that when God places a vision on your heart, there's a reason why it's between you and Him and nobody else. Because I
Mm-hmm.
have met several persons, especially in my professional career, where everybody has told me I did not have what it took to be who I am today. And
Mm-hmm.
one of the biggest things to me was recognizing, because it's hard when you even have people that are in authority, that are literally responsible for the same training that you're requiring to be able to accomplish the task. When they look at you because you don't have the top A scores, but you know in your heart that your love and your passion extends beyond what the grades are, right?
Mm-hmm.
And for me, it was, I knew exactly what God had called me to become and to do. And for me, it
Mm-hmm.
was trusting that vision and going all in on myself. And that honestly has helped me to continue on this journey because I recognize things don't always go according to how we plan. And anybody that walks this field of medicine, you know for a fact.
Mm-hmm.
You got to stand firm in what you believe and push through because it's not one, medicine is not for the faint of heart at the end of the day.
Mm-hmm.
And you're going to meet a lot of naysayers along the way. And I met lots of naysayers along the way. And I am thankful at the end of the day that I did not give up and I persevered because I knew medicine extends beyond just having a passing grade. And back then, obviously, you had to have high schools and all of those things. And obviously, that was one of the things that I've always been told. If you're pursuing neonatology, you always have to be the top of the top. And I know for me,
Mm-hmm.
it was never about having the scores, but knowing what the vision and the passion that I had. And you was always going to exceed anything else that an exam score was ever going to tell me at the end of the day.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so it sounds like you were deeply, deeply rooted in your purpose. And you also mentioned that the early events of your life, they also drew you to the field of medicine. How has your sense of purpose evolved over the years?
Oh, man. My sense of purpose has evolved to the point of recognizing that there's more to me than medicine. I think, like so many of us, we come in here and medicine becomes our identity. And medicine was my identity because I was literally born into my profession, right? It became my drive of wanting to give back. Because for me, my vision was always to become a neonatologist and to be able to give back to my home island, which I now get to do with my
Mm-hmm.
mission trip because I'm intentional about spending at least twice a year back there and being able to provide consultancy services when I'm not on mission. And for me, it was recognizing my purpose actually extended beyond that to
Mm-hmm.
the point where now, obviously, as you pointed out, I am now able to serve as a physician coach for two reasons. One, I
Mm-hmm.
want us to be able to find that joy and passion that we all once had when we started in medicine. And because of the system, because of the challenges that we face in the same environments that we are trying our best to be able to show up to serve, because at the end of the day, there is not a whole lot of us in our systems. And I want to be able to
Mm-hmm.
provide services for persons that look like me, but
Mm-hmm.
also reminding everybody that I am not limited by my complexion. I am not limited by the texture of my hair. I am not limited by what you consider what a doctor looks like, right? So that was one. And
Mm-hmm.
the other piece of it was making sure that future little girls know that if I can do it, guess what? They can do it too.
Mm-hmm. And so during the course of your training, because we always talk about this on this podcast, medical training is not easy. And when you start working, and especially as you've mentioned, when you are in a minority, there are many challenges that you face. often during that process, there comes an experience of self discovery.
Hmm.
And what have you discovered about yourself in becoming a doctor that you weren't aware of before you started this journey of becoming a doctor?
Oh, boy, that's a two-edged sword. I recognize, I think this is not unique to me. There's a level of perfectionism that we strive for when we pursue this profession. And a lot of it is obviously because we know we have people's lives in our hands. And the last thing you want to do is to make mistakes. So for me, because of that mentality and because of that teaching, I inadvertently became my own worst enemy. To the point where when you talk about self-care, just even being able to take the time to rest, I work 24-hour shifts in my profession.
Mm.
And when you work 24 hours, you're not expected to have energy when you come home the next day, right? To do the things
Mhm.
that you love and to spend time with the people that you're supposed to. And I remember I used to come home so tired and I used to beat myself up so badly because it's almost like I felt like I did not deserve to rest. I did not deserve to take care of myself. And it's amazing how we end up teaching ourselves these things because most of the time, this is not taught to us. This is literally
Mhm.
what we have had to instill in ourselves many times to be able to get to the positions that we are in, right? Especially when people don't believe that you're capable or people don't think that you look like who you are. So for me, I would say becoming my own worst enemy and striving for that degree of perfectionism was one of those things that I must admit was a double-edged sword
Mhm.
pursuing medicine.
Mhm. Mhm. And
But
as a
it
result
obviously
of that,
became my drive, obviously, for getting to the point where I'm at. But it's also having to teach yourself to unlearn these other things and recognize where your value comes in for those very things that you beat yourself up, right? Yeah,
yeah,
sorry.
yeah, that's a very common phenomenon again in the medical profession, and we're seeing more and more of it, of course, manifesting as burnout, essentially.
Mhm.
And have you ever had burnout, and if how would you navigate through it? What advice would you give to others?
Well, I definitely experienced burnout. Now that I know what burnout really looks like, for me, burnout was depression. But obviously, like most of us as physicians, we are high functioning. Even when we are empty, we still find it within ourselves to keep going. Right? Burnout for me was literally running on empty. And it was always putting everybody else's needs ahead of my own. And when I tell you I come home after a 24-hour shift and not having the energy to anything, I came home one day and I actually had my parents. My parents spent half of the time back in the islands and half of their time with me. And I was very intentional about that. I wanted to give back my parents just a little bit of what they gave to me. So for me, it was being for them having access, obviously, to healthcare and doing all that stuff. So I was very intentional that once I was able to work, get a home, it was to have them come so I can spend quality time with them. But there was no such thing as quality time because most of us don't know what it means to have a balanced lifestyle. Work life balance is a myth in medicine. But one of the things that I had to learn is that you have to be intentional about wanting to live the life that you desire. Because if you don't, your employers are always going to use you and you're going to always end up living somebody else's dream but your own. And for me, when I hit rock bottom that day and recognized you went through all of this to bring your parents here, and you come home day after day, moody, tired, hungry, and you're not intending to do that. But at the end of the day, when you're running from empty, for me, I showed up with headaches, I showed up with moodiness. Those are the worst things to me. I never used to work out, I never had the energy to do any of it, right?
Mhm.
So for me, it was recognizing, okay, something got to change. And at the end of the day, change only comes when we recognize that we needed to change. And for me, once I recognized what my burnt out looked like, funny thing is, I recognized that I needed to start drinking water.
Mm. Okay.
Sounds crazy, right? Think
Very
about it.
unusual, very different from what somebody would think about. Mm.
Yeah. And obviously at the time, for me, I was like, what are you talking about? I'm like, water? How is that gonna make a difference? But when you're dehydrated, daily headaches,
Mm.
moodiness, right?
Mm-hmm.
Cravings, being
Mm-hmm.
depressed, they are all tied into
Mm.
dehydration. And for me, I
Mm-hmm.
struggled to drink water to the point where if you had to put a water bottle in front of me, that water bottle would probably be half by the end of the next 24 hours.
Mm. Mm. Mm.
So I struggled to drink water because of the taste. And yes, water is supposed to be tasteless, but that was
Mm-hmm.
never the case for me because I have always been able to tell the difference.
Yeah.
And I came across another physician that shared about this different water. And I was like, what is she talking about? She talked about how much her life changed from drinking this water. And I was 100% skeptical, like most of us. If you hear another physician talking these things, you're wondering if she's going cuckoo or something, right? And I actually had a conversation with her and I listened to her and I saw what she meant. And I said, all right, God, I believe you obviously placed this opportunity in my way for a reason. So I went all in. It's having a machine, it's having a product. And if you choose to, you can choose to embark on the business. She would
Mm-hmm.
tell you to this day, I told her I don't sell, I don't share my story on social media, and I don't drink water. And I came and I'm doing every single one of those things that I said I don't do, right?
Yeah.
But my life changed. I started walking out. I started walking with my dad. My dad was depressed himself. And we started spending intentional time together, walking mornings and evenings together. He's also diabetic. So he was able to lose a lot of weight. He's now officially my energizer bunny that I can't get him to settle
Mm-hmm.
down now because of this journey. We started spending intentional time with my parents, going out for meals. Now I do at least one trip a year with my mom. We always have to have a mother daughter trip together. And it really changed the game for me. It really unlocked my purpose. It reignited my purpose to recognize there is more to me outside of medicine, right?
Mm-hmm.
But most of all, it was learning that when my cup is filled, my overflow is able to bless everybody else around me. And I get to no longer show up as the resentful, angry, headache driven version of me anymore.
Mm-hmm. Sounds like a life-changing moment, that conversation about water.
Mhm.
And from the start of our conversation, you've mentioned a few people that have had an impact in your life, the pediatrician that you went to, of course, your mother, and now the colleague that introduced you to the concept of water. Can you share just your philosophy around mentorship and other figures that
Mm.
might have also helped you or guided you on this journey? How important is it in our profession to be mentored and also to mentor others?
Mentorship is key. Mentorship will save your life. I recognize as physicians, we like to do it on our own. We hold a pride that we have to figure this out on our own. And the reality is, when you see other persons that are literally living the life that you desire, we have to be willing to learn what got them to that point. And if you're able to find somebody that is actually willing to walk alongside you on your journey, that are actually willing to share their experiences and their knowledge, there's two things that you gain. You gain, obviously, the wisdom that they have experienced, one, to avoid the mistakes that they made so you can get to that point sooner. And the other thing is recognizing the power that you gain when you actually surround yourself with other persons who are further along than where you are, that is willing to pull you and to get you to go exactly where you want to. We weren't meant to do life alone. And for some reason, when you get into medicine, you learn, oh, I got to do this, right? Even when we're not supposed to do half of the things that we do, we go above and beyond. And I recognize a lot of it goes back to our skin color because of the experiences that we experience. We always feel the need to go above and beyond
Mm-hmm.
because it is necessary for us to have to do it because we have to prove to everybody else that we have a place here. Even though everybody else do the bare minimum, we always have to go a step above. And that's the reality. That's the honest truth for us as a Black physician,
Mm-hmm.
especially in America. Because I remember
Mm-hmm.
many times where I would introduce myself as Dr. Josel Doyle. And by the time I leave the room, I would still be called a nurse. Or I would
Mm-hmm.
still be looked at and be like, what you mean you're the doctor? And when you ask them, why don't I look like a doctor? They'd be like, oh, you just seem too young. I'm like, really? That's the reason. But hey, if that's what you think, by all means, I'm okay with that. But the reality is, we have to be able to always push ourselves outside of the box, right? Because we
Mm-hmm.
are literally, by the time everybody sees you, there's already a box. There's already a
Mm-hmm.
limitation that is set on us that we're never gonna be good enough. And I will
Mm-hmm.
honestly say that was one of the things I dealt with, feeling inadequate for a long time. Despite all the accomplishments, it doesn't matter. We can get the house, we can get all the titles that we want. But whenever you set your standard to somebody else's, you recognize that you will never feel like you measure up. And for me, that was one of the things that I had to unlearn, especially when I
Mm-hmm.
started this journey.
Mm-hmm. And so part of that would be also about building your resilience
Mm-hmm.
to those types of comments, working in an environment that may be hostile to you. How do you build you and maintain your resilience? And what are your suggestions for other doctors maybe that are watching as to how they can also cultivate resilience in their own lives?
I would say it goes back to what my coaching program now teaches us. There's two things. One, you got to get clear on who you are. And we have to recognize, as much as we love our profession does not define us. It is not who we are at the end of the day. And for me, once I was able to get clear on my identity, because I know first and foremost, I'm a child of God, I'm a woman first thing first. And learning to prioritize that woman becomes important to get you to keep going. Because at the end of the day, I think just being a woman makes you resilient no matter what. Because at the
Yeah.
end of the day, we carry the backs of our children, we carry the backs of our jobs, we carry the backs, everything that we do, because that's just how we are natural nurturers. That's how God made us to be, right? He made us a rib for a reason at the end of the day, right? So for me, when you learn to settle in that power of who God made us to be, it helps you with that resilience. But it's also trusting and believing in who we are at the end of the day and be so unwavering about it that even when challenges come, that you stand firm.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
for me, I think that was one of the biggest things that I had to learn along the way because, as I said, being my worst own enemy almost undid me several times in this journey, because
Mm-hmm.
then when you allow naysayers and their things to finally get into your head, it's very easy to want to give up and call it quits. And I will tell you, one of my wake up points, and it wasn't even related to my entrepreneurship journey, when I finally became a neonatologist. I have never failed in my entire life.
Mm-hmm.
I may not have always had A's, I may not always had 90s, but I have never failed in my medical career
Mm-hmm.
until I finally became a neonatologist. I did my boards the first time. and I failed.
Mm.
And I was broken. I really started to believe what the naysayer said. But it wasn't until when I got into it, I recognized I was literally on the verge of burnout already from since fellowship. Because if I had to share the stories of what I experienced in fellowship, some days I don't even know how I ended up in this where I'm at. So I recognize, and they were right, when you go into neonatology, there's a level that you just can't walk in and take the exam, right? And it just can't be superficial, because when they tell you you need to know second and third degree understanding,
Mm.
that was necessary. And because I didn't have the time, because my time frame, whenever I had boards at that time, I literally had months, six
Mm.
months to prepare.
Mm.
And I already had struggled to keep up with studying during fellowship because of all of the things that we had to go through. And I didn't pass. And I
Mm.
struggled with that because, again, there's an ego that we carry
Mm.
with failure. And especially in
Mm.
medicine, failure is a non-negotiable. And I was broken. And I remember I went to God one day and I said, I believe you have a lesson in this. I don't know why you wanted me to go and study for 2 more years and work as a full-time neonatologist. And at the
Mm.
time when I started, there was supposed to be 5 of us, and one of my partners decided to step down. And then one of my partners left. So I ended up having to work more shifts in the midst of having to study.
Mm. Mm.
And that, outside of just the breakdown of the ego, because listen, breaking that ego is, man, that takes a toll on you. And in the
Mm.
midst of adding all these other challenges, for me, it was the most humbling experience of my life.
Mm.
And I think that's one of the reasons why I recognize the importance of sharing my story, of making
Mm.
sure that other persons know failure doesn't define you. And
Mm.
it definitely does not determine what your final destination is going to be. There's power in making sure that you use your failures as your next stepping stone to get into the next point that you're hoping for.
Absolutely, absolutely. And there's a very, you know, that's a good point to raise as I want to move now to your business life, because
Right.
as you've described, you went through a lot of challenges through your neonatology training, whether it's people doubting you or you doubting yourself, just the pressures of fellowship. What lessons did you learn from that journey that you are now taking into your entrepreneurial space? And maybe you'll share a little bit more about all your many businesses that you have. But I'm really curious about the ups and downs that you'd experienced in your training, in your personal life, through burnout, through doubting yourself. What did you learn from that you are now applying to your businesses?
That's a really good question. Um, Whoa, I don't even know where to start to answer this one. I think at the end of the day, it's going to go back to knowing what your vision is. Because I recognize, in particular for me, when I think at all of the struggles that I had in fellowship, a lot of it stemmed to how people perceive you, right? Back then, I was a woman driven, obviously, to finally accomplishing the goal that I've always wanted, which was becoming a neonatologist. And I remember I faced a lot of judgment because, by nature, anybody that knows me, when you first see me, you'll probably figure I'm a mean person because I don't smile and stuff like that. And that became a necessary measure for me. I recognize as a Black woman in medicine, there is this perception that people have of you. And most people look at me because I'm petite. Everybody thinks I'm very quiet, whatever, because which I am. I'm very reserved when it's necessary. But there's a level of drive in me, especially when it comes to taking care of my patients, that there is this no nonsense restricted lady that shows up, right? And for me, I always had this mentality: when I come to work to take care of my patients, do all I'm supposed to do, and go home. And a lot of people struggle with that until people get to know me and get to know, oh, you actually smile, you're very warm. A lot of people judge me based on the fact that I didn't smile back then. And it was a big struggle. And it added a lot to the pressure that I had to experience in fellowship. And then when everybody got to know me, it became easy because everybody fell in love with me and recognized, oh, whoa, she loves what she does, right? Because the reality is, once you get to know me, and that was one of the things that actually built my confidence, is that I had to get so sold on me that no matter what people said, no matter what the challenges were, that I had to keep pushing because I knew again what my purpose was, right?
Mhm.
So for me, it was being so sold on myself that nothing anybody can tell me was going to waver me. Because when
Mm.
I get to show up and to show up as a neonatologist and put my hands at work, the very same hands that God created, this very same hands that God knitted, even before I knew that I was meant to be in this purpose, that version of me shows up.
Mm.
That version of
Mm.
me shows up unwaveringly
Mhm.
with that
And so,
purpose.
somebody looking at you from the outside will definitely see a successful doctor, a successful businesswoman. How do you define success for yourself?
Oh, for me, success, I would define success as the impact that I'm able to make in somebody else's life. It's not about me. I think that's been one of the biggest lessons I learned. This life that I live is not about me. Everything that I do, I honestly do it now for the glory of God. Because I recognize that when He asks us to be lighthouses, there's a reason why He asks you to be a lighthouse and not just a lamp, right? He said He gives us His word to be a lamp to our feet, but He calls us to be a lighthouse because at the end of the day, there's no playing small when God has an anointing and a favor for your life. And the day that I learned that was the day that I recognized, even when I'm broken, even when I feel like it's time to give up, I don't. Because at the end of the day, I know there's a baby whose life depends on me showing up as my best self. I know there's a little girl who's looking at me and wants to walk the same journey. I want to help her to go along the journey without making the mistakes that I made. But most of all, it
Mm.
was recognizing that when God gives us a purpose in our lives, He doesn't ask us to half do it. And it was me having to learn to take myself off of the sales rack and truly start selling who I was unapologetically, authentically, and being intentional about all of it.
Mm. Hmm. I feel like my spirit is being rejuvenated with what you're saying. It's so clear from the minute you started sharing your story how much your spiritual life is important to you. Do you take that spirituality into your businesses? Is it are your businesses part of your spiritual growth? And I'd like you to tell us a little bit more about your coaching
Mm.
business and
Yes.
your retreat business, just the different elements. How are you taking the spirituality into your businesses?
Well, I would say my business has started because of my faith, hands down.
Mm.
When I talked about the water, it was outside of just drinking water, it was then being intentional about pouring the living water of God's word into my life. And that's really been my game changer because it allowed me to make sure that I took time for me, right? It allowed me to start healing those parts of me that I was so resistant to. And that's where my coaching came in. It's called intentional grace for a reason, because it's been the strategies of grace that I've had to teach myself along this journey to show up as this confident person. You know, there's a saying where they say you fake it until you make it.
Mm-hmm.
And I can say for most of my life, I feel like I was faking it till I made it,
Mm-hmm.
which really and truly wasn't the truth. That's a lie the devil tells you. But I also knew I wasn't showing up with this true confidence. And I call it God confidence. Because there's one thing to show up as confident just because you think you're pretty or you have these accomplishments that don't last. For me, it was recognizing the God confidence that was needed for me to show up in my purpose, but also making sure that I show up with passion and authentically do it. And that's where intentional grace MD came about, because I recognize, I will be honest, I struggled to wanting to coach. I knew it was, once I embarked on my journey of entrepreneurship, I recognized it was how I needed to show up. But I struggled with it because I was like, who are you to want to help somebody else? Right? What gives you the right? Right? And even showing up as an entrepreneur, because it requires you to sell. But for me, it was learning, not selling in the way that we always think about it, right? Like you always have to show up with somebody, oh, I want you to buy something. No. It's being able to share how I serve. And for me, once I was able to unlock, my service does not have to be limited to the box of neonatology, right? Because one of the things I recognize outside of my love for my babies, I also fall in love with their parents.
Mm.
But more so, I fall in love with their mothers even more.
Mm.
And one of the things that I learned from my own mother is how good we get at serving everybody else at the expense of ourselves. And that's where my coaching came about. It was recognizing you were so much of a people pleaser. And I remember when I keep hearing that word, I hated that word. I didn't understand it. But the reality is, for us showing up as our best selves in medicine, we people please because we put everybody else's needs ahead of our own, many times our own detriments, right? I have given up vacation after vacation to accommodate other persons, whether my colleagues, whatever the case is, to the point where I recognized I was doing it so often over the last couple of years that even when I had my own appointments, I had to end up intern canceling my own things, including my own vacations. And it all adds to your burnout because one cannot pour from an empty vessel. And there's a reason why they told you every time you get in an airplane, you have to put on your oxygen mask first as a parent before you can put it on your child, because at the end of the day, we have to be alive to be able to actually save lives, right? And for some reason, I took that for granted. And I think most of us take that for granted.
Yeah.
So that's where intentional grace came in. It was realizing you have to save yourself in order to save all the persons that you want to. And every time we show up, keep trying to run an empty, we force our bodies to shut down, which is why most of the times we get sick. And because of the bad habits that we form as professions, as physicians, we often have to have somebody literally tell us that you need to go to the emergency room because we ignore the very same things that we tell our patients to pay attention to. We ignore. We tell our patients to make sure to drink water. What is the one thing that everybody tells you as a doctor? How much water do you drink in a day?
Yeah.
You are literally required to drink a minimum of 6 glasses, 8 ounces, 64. And we ignore it. Most of us work all day, never go to the bathroom. Why? Because we don't drink enough water to be able to detox or cleanse ourselves. And when I recognized the importance of doing these little things, it literally forced me to start taking care of myself. I used to spend hours on the unit making myself available to everybody, not eating, not drinking. You end up being moody and you wonder why everybody looking at you like, Dr. Doyle, what's wrong with you? You know, you trying to show up for everybody, you're not taking care of the person that everybody's looking up to so you can take care of them. So I had to learn to step away. You know, there's things in medicine, they always make you accessible to everybody. That's why we walk around with a phone. So when they need you, they call you. You don't have to sit in the middle of the unit for everybody to see you to know that you are accessible. The day that I finally got to my breaking point and got up and walked out of my unit, decided to eat, decided to sit at my office, take time to decompress first. Because most of the time, you know, our minds are running 360, trying to figure out all of these things. You try, obviously, you got to be focused on the kids when you're in the hospital. One of the things I've learned, I had to compartmentalize. When I'm at work, I'm at work. Before, I used to take work home with me. I don't take work home with me anymore. When I am done, I made sure I sit down, I get my notes down. And you recognize when you start taking that time for you, how much more you're able to get done. Because you're able to eat, you're able to sit down and do notes. My colleagues will tell you, when I'm on, I don't chit chatter. Yeah, we will talk about patients, do whatever. But when it's time to take care of kids, I sit down, I work on my notes, I see my babies, I examine them, I talk to my parents. I sit down and I get that done. Because at the end of the day, notes can take you all day. I am not staying in the hospital to sit down to do notes all day. I am not going to keep compromising, not being able to spend time. Because we work hard to be able to take care of our kids, to be able to take care of our parents, to be able to take care of our husbands and all these things. But here you are showing up, going above for everybody and everything. And then in turn, you end up missing out on the very things that you're working so hard on. It's counterproductive. So the day that I recognize, oh, you mean when I take care of me, you mean I get to show up not being moody, not having an attitude, actually having the nurses fall in love with you, because what you recognize is that people actually get to see the real you and not the exhausted you, not the depleted you, not the empty you. The empty you is never going to be able to show up as a happy version of you. When you're hungry, that's a survival mechanism. You're not expected to show up with a smile on your face when you're hungry. No. So once I recognize that, that is really where this entrepreneurship journey all it was taking the time for me. It was learning to really love me. And it made it so much easier for me to continue to show up. And now I get to do all these things, right? I get to serve
And
as a
so you're
coach.
working, and so you're working with women physicians to share with them all these amazing lessons to help them build their
Right.
resilience, to help them prevent stress, to help them prevent burnout, as you say, so that they can show up and be of service
And
to
be of
their
service.
patients and to their families and to the community at
Yeah.
large.
Yeah.
So,
Not
as you
having to
reflect,
compromise anymore and not having to pick and choose, because when you keep giving everything to work, there's nothing left for you.
mm, mm.
Because there's nothing
So,
for you to
looking back
pour.
now at all these important lessons that you've learned and thinking about your career and reflecting on your career, what legacy do you hope to leave behind?
But it's a funny thing. I'm glad that you share that, because I never considered that I had a legacy to leave. Because most of us think a legacy is having your children and being able to provide for them. I don't have kids of my own, right? So my legacy is literally going to be the impact that I have on people's lives. And again, maybe it's God's will that I'm going to have kids later. And I will have kids. I do have children because I consider my godchildren the patients that I take care of. My nieces and nephew, they are mine because they are who I go above and beyond to be able to provide for in the long term. But my legacy for me, it's the impact that I have on people's lives. More so to the point of recognizing that when I'm able to serve other professional women like you and I who go above and beyond, Not only does it help them to be able to get to their point sooner, that they don't have to spend the same amount of time and energy that I wasted trying to figure this out, that I now get to share these strategies with them, and proven strategies, right? Because as you pointed out, outside of working a full-time job as a neonatologist, I do my coaching. I'm now hosting a luxury wellness retreat, sharing these same tips with the ladies that are making this investment to take care of themselves and to take a break from their responsibilities to take care of the woman first, right? It's also being able to show up in my other businesses also. And you wonder, how am I able to juggle all of this? It all goes back to making sure that I take care of the woman first. But it was also recognizing my game changing strategy was putting God at the center of it all. Because we would like to take the glory and we would like to say that we do this on our own. He made this happen, one, by sparing my life almost 41 years ago, putting the vision on my heart, and then pushing me not to lose sight of it, right? Because it's bigger than me at the end of the day. And now allowing me to be able to serve in all of these capacities of recognizing I get to create a space, a safe space for women like ourselves. Because one of the things I recognize, especially as strong professional, independent women like ourselves, the power that you gain when you actually collaborate and you share a space with other women that look like us, that are further along than us, that inspire us and hold us accountable to showing up. And I'm thankful to Dr. Coach's School because now I got the opportunity to meet a beautiful woman like yourself who I now aspire to be like, right? Because now you are unapologetic about exactly how you want to serve. And you get to live medicine on your terms, right? And that you could only get when you decide to get out of your own way and decide there is power in collaboration. And there's power when you decide to enter into rooms with other women that look like us, that think like us. And better yet, if you can be around women who are further along than you are, get in that room because then you are challenged and held accountable to keep going on your journey.
Mm. I want to say that's such a wonderful place to end, but I am going to give you an opportunity just for one more word because I'm so inspired by everything that you've said to a doctor that looks like us out there. What is your message to them as we wrap up?
My message to them is that your greatest power is always going to showing up as you. And that is unwavable. You being able to show up the complexion that you have, the hair that you have, the beauty that you have, the strength that you have, the challenges that you face, you were able to overcome them in such a way that nobody else can ever do it. And I know for a fact that especially when you put God at the center of it all, you become invincible. That even when you're in your valleys, know that you're never by yourself. It may seem impossible, but what's impossible with man is always possible with God. And when you start living in His Word and you start pouring it in every day, trust me, it lights a fire inside you. It lights a fire on your feet to keep going because you can't keep still no more. So go all in on yourself and be so unwavering that nobody could convince you otherwise.
Mm. Amen and amen. And a beautiful word to end our conversation. Dr. Josel Doyle, neonatologist and superwoman and entrepreneur. Thank you so much for gracing me with your presence and your time and dropping so many words of wisdom and motivation and also encouragement. Thank you so much, Dr. Doyle.
Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity and your grace, extending your grace to me today, but most of all, just allowing me the opportunity to share my story, but also being able to be alongside you. For me, it's humbling and I appreciate it more than you can
Thank
imagine.
you. And that wraps up another insightful episode of Doctors of the Baobab. I do hope that you found today's discussion both enlightening and empowering. And before we part ways, I want to extend a heartfelt invitation. If you're a doctor, if you've been inspired by what you have heard today, feel free to reach out to me as your life coach. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast so that you never miss an episode filled with valuable insights and strategies for personal growth. And if you also know someone who can benefit from our discussions, be sure to spread the word and encourage them to tune in. And let's stay connected beyond the podcast. Follow on social media, on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram to join the conversation. Share your thoughts and connect with like minded individuals who are also on their own journey towards living their best lives. Doctors of the Baobab, where medicine meets motivation.